Hey guys, this is the Obsidian Pixie, and I'm doing my first ever BookTube video. I hope you'll bear with me while I go through this learning experience. I will do an introductory video at some point, but for right now, I want to talk about NEWTs. That's right, NEWTs, the Nastily Exhausting Wizarding Tests, also known as the second half of the magical readathon put on every year by the wonderful lady over at Book Roast. There will be a link to her information in the description. She's put together this wonderful Wizarding Careers booklet, and the career that I'm going for is Metal Charmer. I did Owls in April and did all 12 of my Owls, and now I'm doing NEWTs. NEWT starts today, and I have to get outstanding grades in Arithmancy, Charms, and Transfiguration. I have to get exceeds expectations grades in Ancient Runes, and an acceptable grade in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Now, each one of these classes has certain prompts that you have to read, and you have to read 1 book to get an A, 2 books to get an E, and 3 books to get an O. So, for Arithmancy, the first book I have to read is a book that ends on an even page number. I'm reading An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I started it this morning. I'm about 150 pages in already. And total this book has, let me just double check here for you. The book itself ends on page 338, which is an even page number. For my Exceeds Expectations read, I have to read a standalone book. I'm reading The Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. I've heard lots about this book. I've never read it before. I'm actually really looking forward to reading it. I know that it caused a really big stir when it originally came out in the 60s. This is the 50th anniversary edition that I have here. For my outstanding grade for Arithmancy, I have to read a book longer than 350 pages. So let's be way more than 350 pages. I'm reading A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. I read A Game of Thrones for a readathon last month, and I'm reading A Clash of Kings for a readathon this month. For Charms, to get an acceptable in Charms, I have to read a book with a gorgeous cover. I'm reading this one. It's called Winter Song by S.J. Jones. The cover just fascinated me. The idea of the story, I heard it described as a combination of The Labyrinth, the movie The Labyrinth, and Beauty and the Beast. And since Labyrinth is one of my favorite movies of all time, I thought that that might be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to reading it. To read a comic, graphic novel, or manga for my Exceeds Expectations, I am reading The Dark Crystal Creation Myths, Volume 1. Brian Froud is one of my favorite artists ever, so I've really enjoyed these when I've read them before. I'm looking forward to reading them again. I do have all 3 volumes. I'm just reading one for this particular readathon. For my outstanding grade for Charms, I have to read a paperback book. I am reading Magic Kingdom For Sale Sold by Terry Brooks. This book is one that my husband has read when he was younger. He really enjoyed it. We actually picked this up for my son to read, but it's a little bit much for him right now, so I'm going to read it instead. We do also have the second book in this series, and I will hopefully get into that one possibly for a readathon next month. For Transfiguration, I had to read a book, my acceptable Transfiguration marks. I needed a book with LGBT, etc. representation. I'm reading Work in It by RuPaul. I'm a big fan of RuPaul, have been for a really long time, and I really hope that this is a really good book. For my Exceeds Expectations mark in Transfiguration, I have to read a book that is not first in the series. I'm reading Banana Cream Pie Murder by Joanne Fluke. This book is definitely not first in the series. I think it's probably about 20th. I do have all of them up to this point. I have read all of them and really enjoyed them. Plus, these books have recipes in them, which is where I get most of my cookie recipes, and I love making cookies. So hopefully I'll find even more awesome cookie recipes to try in this, as well as enjoying the story. Again, for my outstanding, I have to read a book longer than 500 pages. So let's just try and kill ourselves this month. I'm reading another Game of Thrones book, Storm of Swords. So yeah, that's 2 Game of Thrones books in 1 month on top of all of the other things I have to read. So wish me luck. For Ancient Runes, I have to read a book recommended by a friend. I am reading this book, The Abyss Surrounds Us by Emily Skrutsky. This was recommended to me by my friend Septimus Snape, who also has her own BookTube channel. You should definitely check it out. I'll put a link in the bottom. And it looks actually kind of fascinating about sea monsters and things like that, and I'm really looking forward to reading it as well. A book written in past tense. My Exceeds Expectations grade. I'm reading Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen. Again, this is one that I've read before, but I do really enjoy it. I enjoyed the movie as well. And part of the interesting thing about this book is it's the narrator is basically telling his life story. So it was done in a really good way, really fascinating, and I'm looking forward to a good reread. My outstanding grade for Exceeds Expectations, which is not technically required, but why not get as good a grade as we can? A book that's been on your TBR for ages. I am reading The Atomic City Girls by Janet Beard. This is a book about the people in a town called Oak Ridge in the United States in the 40s. Oak Ridge was basically a town built specifically for the creation of the atomic bomb. And I've read another book with a similar premise, The Girls of Atomic City, very similar name as well. So I'm really fascinated to read this one. It's written from a slightly different perspective, so I'm really excited to get more information about the whole situation. Defense Against the Dark Arts. I have to read a book that is black under the dust jacket. I am reading Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, which, as you can see, is black under the dust jacket. I have read it before several times. I do have the entire series. You can see them behind me on my shelf. And nice, easy read to make up for some of the really hard reads I'm giving myself in other sections of this readathon. For Exceeds Expectations, it was Gilderoy Lockhart's Memory Charm. Read the first book you remember from your TBR. I am reading Truthwitch. I was supposed to read it for a book club a couple months ago and never got around to it. Found it very intimidating listening to all of the responses that other people in the book club were having for it. But it was in fact the first thing I thought of because it was still sitting on my table. So I'm going to try and read it this month and hopefully get through it. And again, this is an extra credit book. I only need an acceptable grade in Defense Against the Dark Arts. My last book, again, an extra credit book for my outstanding grade in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Read a book written by an English author or set in England. I'm reading The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. My husband and I are big Gaiman fans. We have a ton of his work. The first book of his I ever read was Stardust, and I loved it. This one, however, is one I have not read, though I believe my husband has. I have tried reading it before and just couldn't get into it, but I'm going to give it another try and see what happens. In case you're wondering what I've been looking at on my table, I have my bullet journal here with all of my TBR laid out here. There we go. In my fascinating Harry Potter washi tape. And yeah, so that is my readathon for NEWTs. I will put links to Book Roast and the Magical Readathon Twitter, and to my friend Septimus Snape's YouTube page, and I hope you enjoy, and I will be back in a couple weeks to talk about my wrap-up. Thank you very much.